I never expected that a burst pipe in my apartment building would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the biggest shifts often come not from a grand plan, but from a simple, mundane disaster. Before that night, my life was a neat collection of routines, a quiet rhythm of work and solitude that I had convinced myself was contentment. But here's the thing about a quiet life. It gives you a lot of time to notice what you're missing. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 28 and working as a freelance graphic designer from my one-bedroom apartment. It was my sanctuary, a place I had carefully curated with soft lighting, overflowing bookshelves, and the constant, comforting hum of my computer. My social life was minimal, consisting of a few close friends I saw sporadically and a lot of conversations that happened through a screen. I wasn't unhappy, not really. I was just settled. Settled in a way that felt both safe and profoundly lonely. The object of my quiet, unfulfilled longing lived one floor above me. His name was Caleb. He was the kind of man you noticed without trying. Broad-shouldered and taller than me by a good few inches, with dark, unruly hair that always looked like he'd just run his hands through it. I knew he did something physical for a living, construction or landscaping. Maybe, judging by the dusty work boots he often left by his door and the sheer, easy strength in the way he moved. We had the typical neighborly interactions, the kind that are more about acknowledging shared space than forging a real connection. A nod in the hallway, a quick "Hey, how's it going?" by the mailboxes, a shared, awkward silence in the elevator. From these fleeting moments, I had constructed an entire persona for him. He was confident, outgoing, probably had a beautiful girlfriend and a big circle of friends who went out for beers on Friday nights. He was, in every way I could imagine, existing in a world completely separate from my own. He was the sun-drenched, noisy world outside my quiet, shaded window. I'd sometimes hear the muffled sounds of his life through the ceiling. The heavy tread of his boots in the evening, the low thrum of music I didn't recognize, the occasional sound of laughter when he had people over. Each sound was a small, sharp reminder of the distance between us, not just the 10 feet of floor and ceiling, but the vast, immeasurable gulf between the life I imagined for him and the one I was living. I was an observer, a narrator of a story I wasn't a part of, and I had resigned myself to that role. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build walls for safety and then wonder why you feel so alone inside them. That particular Friday started like any other. I finished a project for a client, made myself a simple dinner, and settled onto the couch with a book. The rain started around 8, a gentle patter against the window that soon swelled into a relentless downpour. I loved the sound of rain. It was a cozy, enclosing sound that made my quiet apartment feel even more like a refuge from the outside world. I felt insulated, safe. I had no idea that the very thing I found so comforting was about to bring my world, and his, crashing together. It began with a faint dripping sound. I tried to ignore it, assuming it was just the storm playing tricks on the old building's pipes. But the sound grew more insistent, a steady, rhythmic tap-tap-tap that was impossible to tune out. I muted the television and listened. It was coming from the corner of my living room, near the window. I got up, a sense of unease creeping over me, and saw it. A small, dark patch was blooming on the ceiling, and from its center, a single drop of water fell, then another, then another. My heart sank. I knew what it meant. A leak from upstairs. Caleb's apartment. Before I could even fully process it, the dripping intensified. A second spot appeared, and then a third. A low, ominous groan echoed from above, followed by a sudden, sickening gush of water. It wasn't dripping anymore. It was pouring. Water streamed down my wall, pooling on the hardwood floor. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I grabbed a pot from the kitchen and shoved it under the worst of it, the sound of water drumming against metal filling the sudden, awful silence. Then I heard him. A loud curse from upstairs, the sound of heavy furniture being scraped across the floor, and frantic, thudding footsteps. I raced out of my apartment and took the stairs 2 at a time, my mind a frantic blur of water damage and insurance claims. I pounded on his door, my knuckles rapping against the wood. "Caleb, are you okay? There's water coming through my ceiling." The door flew open. Caleb stood there, looking completely overwhelmed. His hair was damp and stuck to his forehead, his shirt was soaked through, and his feet were bare on the already warped floorboards of his entryway. Behind him, I could see chaos. Water was everywhere, an inch deep across his living room floor, gushing from a ruptured pipe under his kitchen sink. The sound was deafening. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and exhaustion. "I know," he said, his voice strained over the roar of the water. "I can't get it to stop." For the first time, the confident, self-assured man I had imagined was gone. In his place was just a person, utterly defeated by a plumbing disaster. Let me explain something about seeing a person in a moment of crisis. It strips away all the pretense, all the imagined narratives you've built around them. In that moment, he wasn't the unattainable neighbor from upstairs. He was just Caleb, a guy whose apartment was currently trying to become an indoor swimming pool. And my own anxieties about social interaction evaporated, replaced by a simple, immediate need to help. "The main shut-off valve," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's in the basement utility closet. I'll go shut it off. You call the emergency line for the building manager." He just nodded, looking grateful as he pulled out his phone, his thumb already swiping across the screen. I didn't wait for a reply. I just ran, my sneakers splashing through the water that was now seeping into the hallway. The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. I managed to find the valve and wrench it shut, cutting off the deluge. The building's emergency maintenance guy promised to be there within 2 hours. When the immediate crisis was over, we were left standing in the dim, damp hallway between our two apartments. The adrenaline started to fade, leaving a strange, quiet intimacy in its wake. Caleb was leaning against the wall, his head tipped back, his eyes closed. He looked completely and utterly drained. The water in his apartment had finally stopped rising, but the damage was done. Everything was soaked. "Thanks," he said, not opening his eyes. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. I kind of panicked. My brain just shut down. "Don't worry about it," I told him, and I meant it. "It's a lot to deal with." I hesitated for a moment, my own social awkwardness starting to creep back in. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the deep stress etched around his eyes. "Listen," I said, the words coming out before I had a chance to second-guess them. "You can't stay in there tonight. The maintenance guy said they'll have to pull up the flooring. Why don't you hang out in my place for a bit? At least until we know what's happening." He finally opened his eyes and looked at me. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that I had never seen before. It was a look that said he was out of his depth, and for a moment, I saw past the strong exterior to someone who just needed a safe place to land. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want to impose. Your place is flooded too because of me." "It's just a little water," I said, gesturing dismissively toward my own door. "It's nothing compared to that. Come on. I'll make us some tea or something." He gave me a small, tired smile, a faint shadow of the easy grin I sometimes saw in the hallway. "Tea sounds really good, actually." And just like that, he was in my apartment. It felt surreal, watching him step over the towels I'd laid down by the door and into the middle of my living room. He looked so out of place, so large and solid amidst my carefully chosen furniture and stacks of books. He dripped onto my rug, his soaked jeans clinging to his legs, and ran a hand through his wet hair, looking around as if he'd entered another world. "Wow," he said quietly, his eyes scanning my bookshelves. "You have a lot of books." It was a simple observation, but it felt like he was seeing a part of me, a real part. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little tight. I like to read." It sounded so lame when I said it out loud. He just nodded, a genuine interest in his expression. "That's cool. I mostly just read manuals for work." I went into the kitchen to put the kettle on, my hands moving on autopilot. My mind, however, was racing. Caleb was here, in my space. The man I had only ever exchanged pleasantries with was now standing in my living room, his apartment in ruins, relying on my hospitality. The neat, predictable lines of my life had been completely washed away. When I came back with 2 mugs of tea, he was standing by my work desk, looking at some of the preliminary sketches for a logo I was designing. I felt a flush of self-consciousness. My work was so personal, so much a part of me. He looked up as I approached, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Is this what you do?" he asked, pointing to the screen. "Graphic design." "Yeah," I confirmed, handing him a mug. Our fingers brushed as he took it, a spark of warmth that shot straight up my arm. It was nothing, a completely accidental contact, but it felt like everything. My breath hitched for a second. That's my job." "This is amazing," he said, his focus back on the screen. "The way you've balanced the lines here, it's really clean." He wasn't just being polite. He was actually looking at it, seeing the details I'd spent hours agonizing over. It turned out Caleb wasn't just a builder. He was a creator in his own right. He did custom carpentry, crafting intricate furniture and cabinetry. As we sat on my couch, sipping tea and waiting for news, he showed me pictures on his phone. There were photos of beautiful, handcrafted tables with smooth, flowing lines, of complex built-in bookshelves, of delicate, carved details on a headboard. He talked about the wood, about the feel of it in his hands, the smell of sawdust, the satisfaction of seeing a finished piece exactly as he'd envisioned it. His voice, which I'd only ever heard in short, neighborly bursts, was full of passion. The confident, slightly distant guy from the hallway was replaced by this artist, this craftsman, who spoke about grain and joinery with the same reverence I reserved for typography and color theory. I was completely captivated. "I just love making something real, he said, looking up from his phone. "Something solid you can put your hands on." I knew exactly what he meant. We were creators in different mediums, but the fundamental drive was the same. In that moment, the vast gulf I had imagined between us shrank until it was nothing more than the space between two cushions on a couch. We weren't that different at all. We talked for over an hour. We talked about our work, about growing up in small towns, about the frustrating quirks of our old apartment building. I found myself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty from disuse. He had a dry, self-deprecating sense of humor that was completely disarming. We were just two people, sharing a quiet space while a storm raged outside and a minor disaster unfolded upstairs. It was the most comfortable I had felt with another person in a very long time. A small, significant moment happened then. A moment that probably meant nothing, but to me, it felt like a seismic shift. The maintenance man finally called Caleb back with bad news. They'd need to bring in industrial fans and dehumidifiers. They'd be tearing up the floor first thing in the morning. He wouldn't be able to stay in his apartment for at least a few days, maybe a week. Caleb hung up the phone and let out a long, heavy sigh, the weight of the situation settling back onto his shoulders. He looked utterly defeated. "Well," he said, his voice flat, "guess I'm heading to a hotel." He started to stand up, and on pure instinct, I put a hand on his arm to stop him. "Wait," I said. "Don't be ridiculous." The contact was brief, but the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of his damp shirt was immediate and electric. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, but he didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. He just looked at me, waiting. "It's late," I continued, my voice a little shaky, "and everything is probably booked because of the storm. Just stay here. You can take the couch." The offer hung in the air between us. It was a practical solution to a practical problem, but it felt like so much more. It was an invitation, a crossing of a boundary we had both silently maintained for over a year. He searched my face for a moment, as if trying to gauge if I was just being polite. I tried to keep my expression neutral, to hide the frantic hope that was pounding in my chest. "Please say yes," I thought. "Just for tonight. Please stay." Finally, he nodded slowly. "If you're really sure," he said. "Lucas, I thank you. Seriously, you've been a lifesaver tonight." And the way he said my name, the genuine gratitude in his voice, felt more real and more connecting than all the hallway haze combined. My heart did a slow, hopeful flip in my chest. He was staying. The next step was logistics. He was still in his damp work clothes, and all of his belongings were in his soaked, chaotic apartment. "You need to change," I said, my practical side taking over. "You can't sleep in those. You'll freeze." He looked down at himself as if just realizing he was still wearing his drenched jeans. "Yeah, you're right. I don't suppose." He trailed off, looking embarrassed to even ask. "I've got something you can borrow," I said quickly, already moving toward my bedroom. "It might be a little snug, but it's better than nothing." I rummaged through my dresser, my hands slightly trembling. I pulled out my most comfortable pair of gray sweatpants and a soft, worn t-shirt. They were my comfort clothes, the things I wore when I was feeling sick or sad. Handing them to him felt strangely intimate, like I was sharing a piece of my own private world. I gave them to him and then hovered awkwardly in the bedroom doorway. "The bathroom is just there," I said, pointing down the hall. "You can, change in there." He took the clothes, his fingers brushing mine again. This time, the contact lingered for a fraction of a second longer. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice soft. But he didn't move toward the bathroom. He looked at me, then at my bedroom, a silent question in his eyes. My brain short-circuited. My bedroom was my most private space. The idea of him, of Caleb, being in there, it was both terrifying and exhilarating. Or, I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and strange. "You can just change in here. I'll go get you some blankets for the couch." I turned and practically fled the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I busied myself in the linen closet, pulling out pillows and the thickest quilt I owned, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I was giving him my clothes, letting him change in my room. This was happening. When I came back to the living room, he was there, changed. My clothes, as I had predicted, were a little too short on him, the sweatpants ending an inch or so above his ankles, and the t-shirt fitting snugly across his broad chest and shoulders. Seeing him in my clothes, in my living room, did something strange to my sense of reality. The clear line between my life and his life was blurring into something new and undefined. He looked comfortable, softer somehow, without his work boots and rugged jacket. He looked like he belonged. "These are really comfortable," he said, breaking the silence. He gave a small, self-conscious tug at the hem of the t-shirt. "Thanks again." I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry, and started arranging the blankets and pillows on the couch, making it look as inviting as possible. I was acutely aware of him watching me, of his presence filling the small room. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken things. He tried the couch. He really did. For about an hour, we sat in near silence, the only sounds the hum of the fridge and the rain still tapping gently on the window. I pretended to read my book, but I wasn't absorbing a single word. Every tiny shift of his weight on the couch, every sigh, was magnified in the quiet room. I could feel his restlessness, his discomfort. Finally, he sat up. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "My mind is just racing. Thinking about the apartment, the cost, all of it." He looked over at me, and in the dim light from the street lamp outside my window, I could see the exhaustion and stress warring with a kind of wired energy. "And," he added, with a small, almost embarrassed laugh, "this couch is freezing." And then, the turning point. The moment when everything shifted on its axis. Every rational thought in my head told me to just offer him another blanket. It was the sensible, normal, platonic thing to do. But my heart, which had been whispering to me all night, suddenly started to shout. It was a crazy, reckless, terrifying impulse, but I listened to it. "My bed's big enough for two," I said. The words fell into the silence, feeling impossibly heavy, impossibly light. I couldn't believe I'd said them. I held my breath, waiting for him to laugh, to look at me like I was insane, to make a polite excuse and retreat further into his side of the couch. This was the moment of truth. My cheeks burned with heat, and I was sure he could hear the frantic drumming of my pulse. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable in the shadows. My mind raced, trying to formulate a way to take it back, to play it off as a joke. But then he spoke, his voice quiet and careful. "Are you sure about that, Lucas?" It wasn't a rejection. It was a question. He was giving me an out, but he was also, I realized, asking for confirmation. He was asking if I meant it. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm sure. It's warmer. You need to get some sleep." My reasoning sounded flimsy even to my own ears, a thin veil for the much larger, more complicated truth of what I was offering. But it was enough. He stood up slowly, the couch cushions sighing as they were relieved of his weight. He walked toward my bedroom, and I followed, my entire body feeling like a live wire. We got into the bed from opposite sides, a careful, deliberate distance between us. The mattress dipped under his weight. The clean, familiar scent of my laundry detergent on the sheets was now mixed with his own scent, something warm and earthy. It was an intoxicating combination. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, every nerve ending tingling with awareness of him lying just a foot away. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. The silence was deafening. It was filled with all the things we weren't saying. I was terrified to move, to even breathe too loudly. This was a fragile, delicate truce, and I didn't want to be the one to break it. I closed my eyes, feigning a sleep I knew would never come. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I was so rigid, so tense, that my muscles started to ache. Then he shifted. He rolled onto his side, facing me. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow, pretending to be asleep. I could feel his gaze on me in the darkness. I could feel his breath, warm and steady, ghosting across my cheek. My heart was going to beat its way out of my chest. This was it. This was the most intensely intimate, non-physical moment of my entire life. He didn't move any closer. He didn't touch me. He just lay there, breathing in the same small space of air that I was. And after a minute or two, his breathing deepened, evening out into the slow, rhythmic cadence of sleep. He had fallen asleep watching me. The realization washed over me, a wave of such profound and overwhelming emotion that it almost hurt. The tension in my body finally, slowly, began to release. I opened my eyes and, in the faint moonlight, I looked at his face, his features softened in sleep. He looked peaceful. He looked safe. And I realized, with a startling clarity, that I was completely and irrevocably in love with him. The next morning, I woke up before he did. The first thing I was aware of was the warmth. Sometime during the night, the careful distance between us had vanished. I was on my side, facing him, and his arm was draped loosely over my waist. His face was just inches from mine, his lips slightly parted as he breathed. The snug t-shirt had ridden up, and my hand was resting on the bare, warm skin of his lower back. I had no memory of how we ended up like this, tangled together as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I lay perfectly still, terrified of waking him, of breaking the spell. I wanted to memorize everything about this moment, the weight of his arm on me, the soft stubble on his jaw, the feeling of his steady breath against my collarbone. It felt like a dream, a fragile, impossible thing that the daylight would surely shatter. For a few perfect, silent minutes, there was no awkwardness, no uncertainty. There was just this, us. Then, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were hazy with sleep, and he just looked at me without recognition. Then, awareness dawned. His eyes widened slightly. He seemed to register our position at the exact same moment I became hyper-aware of it. He pulled his arm back as if he'd been burned, and the warmth was instantly gone. He shifted away, creating a sudden, cold gap between us. "Oh," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Sorry. I must have rolled over." He sat up, running a hand through his already messy hair, avoiding my eyes. The intimacy of the night was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. "Morning," I managed to say, my own voice sounding small and strained. The magic was broken. The daylight had arrived, and it had brought reality with it. "Yeah, morning," he mumbled, swinging his legs out of bed. "Thanks for the bed. You're a lifesaver, man." He said it again. Lifesaver. Man. They were words meant to build a wall, to reestablish the old boundaries. They were friendly, grateful words, but they felt like a rejection. Each one was a small, sharp sting. He stood up and stretched, his back to me. "I should, go see what's happening with my place. And get you your clothes back." He was gone from the room before I could say anything else. I lay there, staring at the empty space beside me, the sheets still holding the ghost of his warmth. The contrast between the silent, easy intimacy of the night and the frantic, clumsy retreat of the morning gave me emotional whiplash. My mind, which had been so quiet and certain just moments ago, was now a roaring chaos of doubt and fear. The next 2 days were a unique form of torture. Caleb was in and out, dealing with restoration crews, insurance adjusters, and the building manager. He slept on my couch, refusing my unspoken offer to share the bed again. He was polite, friendly, and deeply grateful, but he was also distant. He kept a careful physical space between us. The easy conversation we'd shared on the first night was replaced by practical updates and polite small talk. I went into a spiral of overthinking. I replayed every single moment of that night, dissecting every word, every gesture, every breath. Had I imagined the intensity? Had I misread the way he looked at me before he fell asleep? Maybe for him, it was just about seeking comfort and warmth after a traumatic event. Maybe sharing a bed was just a practical solution, and the closeness in the night was just an unconscious accident. My hope, which had soared so high, was now plummeting back to earth. He was probably straight. Of course, he was. He was just being nice to the neighbor who was helping him out. The intimacy I felt was a one-sided projection, a product of my own loneliness and longing. I had built a fantasy out of a plumbing emergency. The thought was humiliating. I found myself becoming quieter, more withdrawn, mirroring his own distance to protect myself from further hurt. Our conversations became stilted, full of awkward pauses. My apartment, which had briefly felt like a shared sanctuary, now felt like a tense waiting room. I was losing my mind. 1 minute, I'd remember the feeling of his arm around me, and a fresh wave of hope would surge through me. He felt something, he must have. The next, I'd remember him pulling away, the abruptness of his departure from my bed, and I'd be convinced I had made him uncomfortable, that I had crossed a line and made a fool of myself. Hope and fear were at war inside me, and I was the battlefield. On the third day, a Sunday afternoon, the restoration crew finished up. They had installed massive, loud dehumidifiers in his apartment, but the worst of the cleanup was over. The manager told him he could probably move back in a couple of days, once the floors were fully dry. The end was in sight. Soon, he would be back in his own apartment, and we would go back to being strangers who nodded in the hallway. The thought filled me with a quiet, aching dread. This strange, intense bubble we had been living in was about to burst. That evening, he came back from checking on his place looking tired but relieved. "Looks like I'll be out of your hair by Tuesday," he said, forcing a smile. He was holding a neatly folded pile of clothes. My clothes, the gray sweatpants and the t-shirt. "I ran a load of laundry at my parents' place this afternoon," he explained, holding them out to me. "Wanted to get these back to you." I took them from him, our hands brushing for the briefest of moments. The fabric was still warm from the dryer. This felt like the end. The final transaction. He was returning what he'd borrowed, closing the loop. In a minute, he would say thanks one last time and retreat to the couch, and we would ride out these last couple of days in polite, excruciating silence. But he didn't move. He just stood there in the middle of my living room, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Lucas," he said, his voice low. He finally looked up, and his expression was serious, a deep furrow between his brows. Can we talk for a second?" My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. The conversation I had been both dreading and desperately hoping for. "Yeah, of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I gestured to the couch, and we sat down, a careful foot of space between us. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "Look," he started, staring at his hands, which were clasped tightly between his knees. "I'm sorry if I've been weird the last couple of days." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I've just had a lot on my mind," he continued. "And I haven't been totally honest with you." My stomach twisted into a knot of anxiety. Here it comes, I thought. The "I'm not gay, but I appreciate your help" speech. The "let's just be friends" conversation. I braced myself for the impact. "Honest about what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally turned to look at me, and the vulnerability I'd seen on the first night was back, raw and unfiltered. "The first night," he said. "When I said I couldn't get a hotel, that wasn't true. I mean, it was late, but I could have found a place. I have family in the city. I could have called someone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I didn't want to," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "I wanted to stay here, with you." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be what I thought it was. I don't understand," I stammered. A small, humorless laugh escaped him. "I've been trying to work up the nerve to talk to you for months, Lucas," he confessed, the words coming out in a rush now. "Not just hey in the hallway talk. Real talk. I'd see you with your books and your headphones, and you just seemed so calm, so interesting. But I had no idea how to start a conversation that wasn't about the weather. I was terrified of saying the wrong thing, of misreading everything." He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure frustration. "And then my apartment floods, and suddenly I'm standing in your living room. It felt like some kind of crazy sign. It was my chance." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to understand. "That night, talking to you, it was even better than I imagined. You're smart, and you're kind, and you listened." My mind was reeling, trying to catch up. All my assumptions, all my carefully constructed narratives about him, were dissolving in real time. He wasn't the confident, extroverted guy who had it all figured out. He was just as nervous and uncertain as I was. So, when I woke up, he continued, his voice thick with emotion, in your bed, with my arm around you. I freaked out. Not because I was uncomfortable. I freaked out because it felt right. It felt so damn right that it terrified me. I thought, there's no way he feels the same. I've crossed a line. I've ruined it, so I pulled away. I put up a wall. It was a stupid, cowardly thing to do, and I'm so sorry. Tears were welling in my eyes, blurring his face. All the anxiety, the fear of rejection, the lonely nights of wondering, it all washed away, replaced by a wave of pure, overwhelming relief. He felt it too. He had felt it all. I thought you were straight, I whispered, the words tasting of all my past insecurities. He shook his head, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. I think, I've been waiting for a reason not to be, he said softly. And then I met you. And with that, he closed the small distance between us on the couch. He raised a hand, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently cupped my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, wiping away a tear I didn't even realize had fallen. Lucas, he said, his name a question, a plea, and a promise all in one. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. And then he kissed me. It wasn't like the movies. There was no sudden swell of music. It was quiet and tentative at first, a soft exploration. But it was also real. It was the taste of the tea we'd shared, the relief of a truth finally spoken, the solid, grounding warmth of his hand on my face. It was everything I had been too afraid to even hope for. When we finally broke apart, we just rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air, our small world finally, perfectly aligned. I thought I imagined it all. I confessed into the small space between us. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. You didn't imagine a thing. The next few months felt like waking up from a long, grayscale dream into a world of brilliant color. We didn't rush. We took our time, learning the rhythms of each other's lives, filling in the spaces that had once been filled with solitude. Caleb's apartment was repaired, but he rarely slept there. My place, once just my sanctuary, slowly became our home. His heavy work boots found a permanent spot by the door, right next to my sneakers. His woodworking magazines appeared on my coffee table, nestled amongst my art books. We went on dates. Simple things. Walks in the park, visits to dusty antique shops where he would explain the craftsmanship of old furniture, quiet dinners where we would talk for hours. I learned that he had a surprisingly goofy laugh, that he was fiercely loyal to his family, and that he loved terrible action movies from the 90s. He learned that I hummed when I was concentrating, that I needed at least 2 cups of coffee before I was functional, and that I could spend an entire afternoon happily lost in a museum. He taught me how to use a wood planer. I taught him the basics of Photoshop. He encouraged me to be bolder in my designs. I helped him sketch out ideas for a new project. We were 2 different worlds, yes, but we weren't separate. We overlapped, creating a new, shared space that was richer and more vibrant than anything we had known alone. The quiet loneliness that had been the background noise of my life for so long simply faded away, replaced by the easy comfort of his presence. One rainy Friday night, about 3 months after the flood, we were curled up on our couch, watching a movie. The sound of the rain against the window was a gentle, familiar rhythm. Caleb's arm was wrapped around me, and my head was resting on his chest, rising and falling with his steady breathing. It was a perfect, ordinary moment, the kind I used to only dream about. He shifted slightly, his hand gently stroking my hair. You know, he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. I was thinking about sending the building manager a thank you card. I smiled, tilting my head back to look at him. For what? For the shoddy plumbing that nearly destroyed 2 apartments. He grinned down at me, the expression I had once found so intimidating now the most comforting sight in the world. No, he said softly, his eyes full of a warmth that still made my heart skip a beat. For having the foresight to put the 2 of us right on top of each other. I laughed, a real, happy sound that filled the room. And in that moment, I thought about how strange life is. You spend so long building your walls, curating your quiet, safe little world. You think you're in control. But sometimes, all it takes is a burst pipe, a borrowed pair of pajamas, and the courage to offer up your bed for all those walls to come tumbling down. Sometimes, your life has to get a little flooded before you can finally let the right person in. And I wouldn't have it any other way.